Hi, this is Padmanabhan. Uh, I've been listening to Jiddu Krishnamurthy, the great religious philosopher, for more than 45 years. That's right from my college days. Um, what Krishnamurthy um, talked about brought in enormous input to the mankind. I had the opportunity to listen to his talks from 1977 to 1986. Um, he died in February 1986. Krishnamurthy has discussed with various scientists, doctors, biologists, psychiatrists, computer specialists, and other specialists. Uh, Many of these discussions, um, uh, which revolve around the human problem, are available in as YouTubes now. Fortunate for us. And what he discussed, uh, are mind-boggling in nature. Um, Especially the discussions with Dr. David Bohm um, and various other scientists I'll go mentioning over here. Here a series of discussions with Dr. David Bohm, right from 60s, 70s, 1972, 73, 75, where he talked about reality, truth, and 1980 about the ending of time. In 1983 on future of mankind. Like that, he has done a series of discussions with the various scientists. And I had the opportunity to listen to various discussions via books as well as the YouTubes. Um, Really, they are, they brought in enormous insight, I would say. Right. The core of Jiddu Krishnamurthy's talk, I would say that the core of the core theme of Krishnamurthy, I would say, as that the thought is a divisive force, and it divides mankind. And he says that there's a different way of living in which thought has got no place. Um, um, I have taken a cue from this particular theme, and as well as this after listening to various Krishnamurthy's YouTubes. I have drawn a presentation to explain or bring in as a different dimension, which I thought will be useful, um, um, a different perspective it can bring, I feel, to those who are interested in Krishnamurthy's teachings. Right. With this note, I want to get into your presentation and take you through the presentation. Right. Now, see here, I've drawn a diagram presentation over here. Um, see the various incidents that occur around us are received through senses to the brain, and the brain stores the data in the memory cells, right? This is a simple understanding. Everyone is aware of what is happening, and the brain reacts whenever the incident happens, and also after that, also based on the memory of the data, uh, rather the data stored in the memory cells, right? So this is a simple process everyone understands. Herein, I want to define something more. Um, there is something called a pure brain process and thought tool process. The thought tool is a utility of the brain, if I can say so, and the brain invokes its and then the thought tool operates. Like the way it operates, I'll explain it to the next slides. Right. The thought tool acts based on something called as thought database. The thought database is nothing but a replica of the data stored in the memory cells, or rather an abstract of the memory cells. And then, from which thought tool acts. And the important portion, if I can say, when the thought tool is invoked, it's not only the data that is used with the thought tool, the ego or the self also acts along with that whenever the thought tool is in process. And so whenever this thought tool is invoked, there is because the ego is act, and the nature of the ego requires the other facets of the if other individual, namely the comparison, envy, greed, pleasure, pain, all those things come into play, right? On the other hand, when the brain directly accesses memory cells, let us call it a pure brain process, it knows how to handle data, meaning the limitation or otherwise of the stored data is does not matter. The brain knows will be able to handle the data perfectly. Whereas when the thought tool is used, the data is accessed through thought address and all limitations come into play. When I say limitations here is that once the data itself is limited in terms of how much you have experienced, it's still limited, right? It's within your, so to say, consciousness. That is limited. And not only that, when the thought is acting, right, thought tool is acting, the self is acting. The self actually fragments the data to the way in which it requires. And then, the way it perceives, the way it presents to others, everything is divided. So it's a fragmented data that is stored in the database, I would say. And so the self acts on a fragmentarily at any time and brings so much conflict. And whenever the thought tool is acting, the comparison, envy, greed, or are all acting, or potentially can act, if I can say so, right? So how to know that the thought tool is used, right? So like indicators are, you can see that when suppose you see your own child displaying, there's a joy. But the next minute, you will know that the fear sets in, that whether that joy will go off or whatever it is. That time you can understand that the thought is playing the role here. So it's a pleasure and pain. So basically, when you first see that the child playing, our own child playing, it's a joy. But next moment, when you want to possess that joy, then the thought tool is acting. It's no more, I think if I go by Krishnamurthy's definitions, you won't call it as a joy, it's a pleasure, right? What comes to the thought is only a pleasure. But in the absence of thought, one can define it. Of course, end of the day, it's all words. One can call that as joy, right? So the indicators whether to know whether the thought tool is being invoked are the pleasure, pain, fear, anxiety are all part of the mind. So when that is so, we can show that the thought tool is used. See, otherwise in normal life, the brain process, pure brain process and the thought tool is intermingled, rather intertwined. We would not know whether there's thought process or a brain process. Of course, let's all understand, I'm not a neuroscientist or a brain specialist. These are all the way it occurs in the way in which in our mind and the brain I'm trying to describe. So this is something every common man should be able to feel. So the way I have felt is what I have presented. I think that is what one should be able to feel through. We don't need to be scientists. We can see that for ourselves. So so the brain process and the thought tool process are intertwined. We would not be able to know whether it's a pure brain or a pure the thought tool process. So as I said, one has to be identify that the self is there and the related facets of the self, namely the pleasure, pain, fear, anxiety, are all accompanying that. One can understand that this has been invoked, the thought tool has been invoked. So what happens uh, is that when the pure brain process is happening, it's there's no conflict. It's an infinite data, infinite capacity of the brain that comes into play. Whereas when the thought tool is invoked, it brings pain, because at the end of the day, because the self is acting at any point of time. Self has to have being an energy, it wants to get gratified to itself, and so it will project uh, it will hop from one particular thought to another particular thought. You can see for ourselves, and it can even project also the future to the requirement, so that it gets gratified. And towards this gratification of the self, the thought tool moves at any point of time. It will not be objective. Whereas when the pure brain process acts, it is a selfless process, and by which there is be no limitations the way in which otherwise one would have been used with the thought tool. And now, so having understood this is so, that there is a pure brain process and there is a thought tool based process. So one would expect rather the pure brain process alone to stay with us, right? Uh, and it is possible. It is not out of desire and all. It's just simply because the thought tool brings havoc. It brings pain to us. So the brain itself, if it understands the brain that it understands the thought tool brings in a lot a pain to this to the very brain itself. The brain itself will stop it, because thought tool having been limited, and also is fragmented because self is involved, the brain, and it brings and furthermore conflict. So the brain would, like the way, today we all know that we don't touch a fire. Uh, um, it's not a knowledge that the fire brings, it will hurt us. It's simply a brain will not do that. One doesn't think that, and then doesn't, and after that doesn't stop right in touching the fire. The brain stops. I mean, doesn't go near the fire like that. If the insight that the thought tool is limited and it brings it's always brings conflict and it is divisive, uh, such insight, deep insight, one feels that, and his brain, the brain itself, would then not invoke the thought tool, and thereby the pure brain process remains. This is what I feel as uh, as a as a very simple way to put it across. And what means by a pure brain process, to remain with the pure brain process without, has got a lot of one can define many more aspect about, like I can say pure meditation comes into play when the pure brain process acts. Whenever thought database is acting, there is a irrationality. Like that, one can define many aspects of this, the presence of thought tool and the absence of thought tool. One can define that and map it to what Krishnamurthy and in fact Krishnamurthy and David Bohm talk about. The silence, the meditation, the mind, the universe, the truth acting, all this all can be easily mapped if one understands these two processes. I mean, according to me, at the end of the day, I want the those who are listening to this also to go through that, and we can have a meaningful discussion to further shape this particular dimension, right? So I will present with this note. I mean, I have a lot to discuss on this thought thread. Like, and I have one more slide to talk about that. Like this way. So the only way of living, as I said, direct perception of the brain without using the thought tool. There will be no ego in action, pure brain in action, which will bring infinite capacity of the brain into play. So this is one conclusion. When this is stopped, the brain does not invoke the thought tool, and the thought tool, and because it's not invoked, this database is not acting. Purely the brain acts. So that's how I would say as the way to live, right? One more slide I want to take you through. Yeah. So, like the way the gravitational pulse brings you down, the thought tool, whenever is invoked, the ego pulls it down, the limitations, and the self brings the divisive nature. So the whole objective nature or the capacity of the brain is limited when the thought tool is invoked or the thought database is in operation, right? So like today, you can see various apps that are there. Like you can take, say, a Google search or a Google search on YouTube, you say, like when you go through YouTube, whatever you like, whatever you prefer, namely your already preferred videos or the likes of yours are getting displayed. That is because Google profiles you like that, and based on your profile, it brings in uh, the YouTube which you might like to see. Like that, every app has got profiles you, and it brings the way in which you want to act. It is exactly the way the profile of the self always limits the way in which you have to think. And then the action also will be limited, because your thinking is limited, the action also limited. That's why the very presence of the self, which is a bigger egoistic app, I would say, which profiles you to a divisive nature. And so the whole objective nature of the brain is stopped, rather the irrationality sets in. The rational nature of the brain is stopped by this the thoughtful processes. So one would avoid that, rather the brain would avoid it. Okay. So with that note, I have a lot to discuss on this one. We can discuss in further videos. For now, I'll stop with this kind of a presentation, and we'll take it up at the next step, right? Okay, thank you very much. We'll continue this in the next discussion. Okay.